Hello and welcome to another episode of the Expanse Abridged Podcast series. Today I got chapter 51, which is a Holden chapter of the first book in the series, Leviathan Wakes. So the last time we were hanging out with our boys, Miller has just gone into Eros. So he's gone into the carnal pit with all the creepy crawlies and various things to go set off a bomb. And the background to that is obviously they're trying to destroy Eros, or trying to basically stop it from going to Earth, because currently it's moving, it's sentient, it's moving and grooving, and they don't really know what to do. And while Miller has popped inside for a little bit with his bomb, Holden has been chasing it in the Rocinante with all the crew and that UNN ship. So it's maybe 5 chapters ago now in total. They were also on their way to Eros, so Holden was like, "Oh, you fuck off or I'll shoot you." And then they fucked off for a bit. And now both of them are chasing his current plan. So we open this chapter with them currently still chasing it. And we know from the last chapter when Miller briefly spoke to Naomi, Eros is already at 4 Gs. So Holden knew that humans could tolerate extremely high G forces over short durations. He also knew that the problem with extended exposure to high G was the constant pressure on the circulatory system would begin to expose weaknesses. Have a weak spot in an artery that could turn into an aneurysm in 40 years, a few hours at 7G might pop it open right now. And that's basically the issue they're facing. So Eros didn't shoot anything at them, it could just keep speeding up until their bodies exploded under the pressure. His console was showing 5G, but even as he watched, it shifted to 6. They couldn't keep this up. As if Naomi was reading his mind, "We can't keep this up," popped on his console. And then Holden's basically the context there is Holden's like, Fred's got a plan, and we need to be near Eros when he figures out his plan. Particularly because the context is, we learned a chapter or 2 ago, Eros isn't showing on radar, so that you can only keep in range of it or kind of see it optically. That was one of the reasons Rocinante got there, fortunately why they got there, and now it's moving and grooving. They have to keep eyes on it, which is very hard when it's a big black blob in a big black space. So that's another issue. So it's moving, it's grooving, and it's stealth. And Naomi's like, "What are we going to do? What's the plan?" And Holden's like, he had no idea. His blood was burning with drugs to keep him awake, because he's gone on the juice to kind of deal with all the high G stuff. And the drugs had the contradictory effect of making his brain run at double speed while not allowing him to actually think. Miller was lugging a fusion bomb for Eros right now, and maybe one sad detective pulling a nuclear weapon on a wagon would slip through their defences. That's their one hope right now. "Help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope." And we've sent a very, very sad detective who keeps dreaming of a young woman. So anyway, Holden gets a call from Fred, one of our favourite characters, one of our biggest boys. Fred goes, "Holden, how are you guys holding up?" 6G, spit it out. So Holden can not speak right now because of how strong the gravity is, so he's typing everything out with millimetre movements of his fingers. Fred opens with an anecdote. He's like, the UN cops have gone through all of Protogen's network looking for clues, so he's doing a big search and seize. And he said, "Guess who showed up as public enemy number 1 for Protogen bigwigs? Yours truly. Suddenly all is forgiven, and Earth welcomes me back into her warm embrace. The enemy of my enemy thinks I'm a righteous bastard. Goody, my spleen is collapsing. Hurry up," says Holden. So Fred is going, "I'm all good, thank you." And Holden's like, "I'm dying, please." So Fred lines a plan at the moment is Earth is going to launch thousands of nukes. It's ground-based nuclear arsenal. So Earth's covered in nuclear rockets it can use. So instead of intercontinental ballistic missiles, it's interplanetary, basically. And the Navy's going to launch, they're going to fire those missiles at Eros, hopefully blow it out of orbit, and then the Navy's going to try and pick up all the little things that kind of fall apart. And the idea is hopefully no protomolecule gets to Earth. It'll all just be cast down to the ground. And Holden's kind of like, this is a stupid idea. He says, Holden resisted the urge to shake his head. He didn't want to wind up with one cheek stuck to the chair permanently. Because obviously if he turns his head, he would be able to get it back. And he's like, Eros dodged an Alva, it'll dodge the fucking missiles. It's going so quickly, Miller doesn't feel it, it could get even faster. If Miller doesn't feel it, how fast can it go? And secondly, there's no radar signature, so you can't even see it anymore. Fred's like, that's why we need you to bounce a laser off it. So if they bounce a laser off it, then the missiles can track to that. And also, we can't keep it up. And we can't keep it up, is basically what he's saying. And once we lose visual, no one will be able to track what Eros is. You might have to put it on autopilot, Fred said, meaning you all have to die in the seats you're in right now. And Holden, obviously being the trooper in this one, says, "I'm not killing my crew because you can't come up with a good plan." Fred leaned towards the screen, his eyes narrowing. For the first time, Fred's mask slipped, and Holden saw the fear and helplessness behind it. "Look, I know what I'm asking, but you know the stakes. This is what we have. Right now, Devil's Advocate is just another name for our arsehole." Holden thinks, "I'm crushing myself to death, probably doing permanent damage just because I wouldn't give up, you bastard. So sorry I didn't sign my crew up to die the minute you said to do it." Instead, he just typed, "Let me think about it." So yeah, Fred is asking like the impossible from Holden, who cares about his crew so much, and it's kind of Holden's morals are staying strong here because he's like, if I'm not killing them on a chance. It's like what he said a while ago. It was like a couple of chapters ago. We spoke about him saying about why he wouldn't kill Dresden, because he can't kill Dresden because he may do something. He'd only kill Dresden if Dresden like again tried to do a protein molecule, then he'll kill him. And he wouldn't just kill him because he may be a threat the way Miller would. And Holden, this scenario is like, I'm not going to kill my crew because they may be able to save it. Unless you have a guaranteed plan, I'm not doing it. As he's kind of thinking about that, it goes up to 7G, so he's even stronger on his chest. And the ship's flashing a warning to him saying 12% of the crew is probably going to stroke out. So that's a 1 in 8 chance someone's going to stroke and die. And as he's thinking about that, he's thinking how fast could the ship even go? No one knows, because obviously it doesn't matter how fast a ship can go, it's how much your body can take. And as he's thinking that, he basically just smacks the engine cut-off switch and goes, fuck this, I'm out. And he's wrecked with coughing as his organs try to find their original resting places inside his body. Eros is getting away no matter what we do, is what he tells the crew. Naomi turned her chair and gave him a sad little smile. She had a black eye from the acceleration. We did our best, she said. Holden shoved out of his chair, hard enough that he bruised his forearms on the ceiling, then shoved off hard again, pinned his back to a bulkhead by grabbing onto a fire extinguisher mount. Naomi was watching him across the deck, her mouth a comical O of surprise. He knew he probably looked ridiculous, like a petulant child throwing a tantrum, but he couldn't stop himself. He ends up punching the wall so hard he doesn't even realise. God damn it, he said, just God damn it. Naomi started, but he cut her off. We did our best? What the hell does that matter? Holden felt a red haze in his mind, and not all of it was from the drugs. I did my best to help the Canterbury too. I tried to do the right thing when I let us be taken by the Donager. Did my good intentions mean jack shit? So poor old Holden, he's going through a tough little time. And it's probably like chapter 10 when Holden was like, the point where he nearly lost it because of all the trauma he'd been through. And again, it's kind of all of it's coming through without he hasn't had time to kind of deal with a load of it. Naomi, though, to her credit, stares at him. Her eyelids dropped and she stared at him from narrow slits. Her lips pressed together until they were almost white. They wanted me to kill you, Holden thought. The guilt and rage and sorrow played against each other, turning into something thin and unfamiliar. You're the last person I'd expect to hear self-pity from, Naomi said. Which, that's sharp. That shit is sharp. And Holden's like, show me which button to press to save the world, I'll do it. I just don't want to kill you, is what he's saying. I'm going downstairs to go check on Amos. I'm your operations officer, Holden. Monitoring communications lines is part of the job. I know what Fred wanted. Holden blinked, Naomi pulled herself out of sight. It's quite cute that. Holden being like, I love you, I love my boys, I won't hurt them. And that's why he's so angry, and the entire time Naomi knows, and she doesn't know what she's signed up for. So anyway, Holden starts panicking. He starts thinking about Earth dying, or everyone can turn into these zombies. And every time he sees Eros hit the Earth in his mind, it was the explosion of the Canterbury he saw. And he thinks kind of like the implications of Earth dying. Mars was survived for a while, the Belt was survived probably even longer. But everything would die. Because as we spoke in the prelude, at the right at the start, despite being kind of interplanetary, humanitarian, all the high-end stuff and a lot of the organic materials come from Earth, and you can't get away from that. It's so important, you can't lose it. And Mars and the Belt aren't self-sufficient. And Holden thinks we've been around long enough in space, we could be self-sufficient. Earth and Mars, so the Belt and the Mars could have done it, but there wasn't any need to. They just wanted to fly around in ships and chill out. And he thinks then about the protein molecule and how Dresden has said it himself. The things that had made the protein molecule, loaded it into Phoebe, and shot at the Earth were already godlike, back when humanity's ancestors thought photosynthesis and the flagellum were cutting edge. But he'd taken their ancient engine of destruction and turned the key anyway, because when you get right down to it, humans were still just curious monkeys. They still had to poke everything they found with a stick to see what it did. Which I quite like. Obviously the idea of you didn't know the threat was coming, so you weren't prepared, but still Holden being miserable about how humanity has not rose to the challenge and been the best it could have been, and it could have been in a better position to survive this if it had kind of decentralised itself from Earth and Mars was self-sufficient. Because all Mars is doing right now is it says Earth had been so focused on her own problems, i.e. overpopulation and waste, that she ignored her far-flung children, except when asking for her share of their labours. Mars had bent her entire population to the task of remaking the planet, changing its red face to green, trying to make a new Earth to end their reliance on the old, and the belt had become the slums of the solar system. So yeah, it's interesting the way Holden thinks about that, and I think it's interesting that kind of description of the universe being almost stagnant. So belts, you kind of colonise the belt, Earth, Mars, done the easy stuff, and people just kind of chilled out, and there's been various wars. Which I don't think is really touched on elsewhere in the books, or her books, the idea of humanity being stagnant. But it's interesting it is mentioned here. Anyway, so the UNN ship rings nearby saying, why are we floating? And they're like, well, we can't. Holden's like, we can't sort it out, may as well chill. And then he kind of just stares at systems for a little bit. And as the other UNN ship has stopped, so the UNN ship and science ship have stopped for a bit, they've turned their transponder on. The transponder in this universe is the same as our universe of planes. It just flick like a little beep, lets everyone know where you are. And military ships should keep it on unless they're in combat, because otherwise someone could find where they are. And as Holden sees that on his little screen, his eyes go wide. He's like, Naomi, I need you in ops. I think I'd rather stay down here for a bit, she replied. Holden hit the battle station's alert button on his console. The deck lights shifted to red and a klaxon sounded 3 times. Klaxon with a capital K there, which implies it's a brand or a name, which is interesting. Exo to Nagato Ops, he said. Let her chew him out later, he'll have it coming. And they go for their little plan, and it's... so they've had contact with Miller on Eros, but not through his little suit, because obviously he's wearing a spacesuit, because that's not powerful enough over the distance, so his suit talks to one of the ships which he was in, which carried all the nukes and the people over there, boosts his signal, and then they can talk to Rocinante. And that's important, because even though Eros is absorbing radio signals when you shoot them at it, the radio signals coming off still let you talk to people there. So yeah, you can see where it's going pretty much. It's a bit incredulous, no one else thought of it. But Holden, he's the main character, he's our boy, of course he'd think of it. So there's 5 OPA freighters on the surface. Why don't you remotely control them? They can issue their radio signals and we'll all be sorted, is basically the idea. Holden could hear the smile in her voice, and it melted the last of the ice in his gut. They had a plan, they were going to make a difference. The Ravi rings again, which is the UNN ship, and she says, Captain Holden, we've got our new orders. Seems we're going to be chasing that thing a little further. She sounded almost stoic as she's been sent to her death. And then Holden explains his plan, and then she doesn't have to kill herself. He rings Fred. By the time Fred had gotten back to him with an enthusiastic approval of the plan from both him and the UN Naval Command, the 5 freighters were pinging away, telling the solar system where they were. An hour after that, the largest swarm of interplanetary nuclear weapons in the history of humanity had been fired and were winging their way towards Eros. So all of a sudden, Holden doesn't need to be sad, doesn't need to hit his head on the bulkhead anymore. He's a happy little bean. So we're going to beat this thing, and what more, his crew wasn't going to die to see the end of it. No one else had to die, except Miller's calling, Naomi said. Probably noticed we turned his ship back on. Holden had a wrenching feeling in his stomach. Miller would be there, on Eros, when those missiles arrived. Not everyone would get to celebrate the coming victory. Hey Miller, how are you doing? He said, not quite able to keep the funeral tone out of his voice. Miller's voice was choppy and half drowned by static, but not so garbled that Holden couldn't hear the tone in it, and know that he was going to take a piss all over their parade. Holden, Miller said, we've got a problem. And the chapter ends. So that is a classic Expanse way to end a chapter. Holden, we have a problem. Just after they've solved their problem. And we love it, folks. We do love it. We do love it. But anyway, I think that's an interesting chapter. I think there's some interesting kind of background regarding how humanity is so reliant on Earth and kind of almost stagnant, which doesn't really come out elsewhere. But I think it's also a really good example of Holden's kind of love for Naomi and his crew, and won't kill them unless there is a guaranteed way to do it, even though he's kind of willing to do that if it saves humanity, and particularly his family. I also think it's interesting Naomi's dynamic with Holden of kind of ringing him back in, going like, you can't speak like that, you need to grow up. And I think that's like a nice dynamic. I think it really shows like she's not just kind of subordinate to him, like she just compliment him. I enjoyed that. I think it's also interesting when you see Fred kind of playing the politics, being chuffed with himself with like, oh, they love me now, and Holden's like, please, I'm dying, my testicles are squished into my thighs. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and otherwise I will see you next week.